So whenever? Okay. The magazine, you didn't become involved in the magazine until it moved to Toronto.
Right.
And how did you become involved in the magazine?
Well, first thing I did with the magazine was to write an article on a videotape, and I chose to do that at that time because I thought I wanted to talk about the content of this particular tape. And I thought that was completely absent in general from, I mean, there were a lot of descriptions around, but there weren't any sort of content analysis of what people were looking at in tape.
This is in other magazines.
Yeah, in other magazines, and so it seemed a place that seemed quite open in terms of writing about artists' work, and that was of interest to me because I do tapes, and I wanted to be, to try to write about somebody else's work.
Right. Had you written before at all?
Well, I've written, but I had never written in a publication or written
Right.
that kind of stuff.
So the first writing was actually done with the magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And then you became more involved in the magazine as time went on?
Yeah, well, by the next issue, I was doing some editorial work, and then my interest and my involvement with it expanded from then on.
Right.
And I wrote the first major thing I'd written that was ever published was a piece called Women in Infanticide, which was about 2 issues after I'd written the video review.
Which would have been in about, 79?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And, I think it was earlier than that, wasn't it? Yeah, no, 79. Whenever. That it, and that was a real, it was quite problematic in terms of printing it because we had already made the shift in terms of the body politic issue.
Well, what shift are you talking about?
The shift in terms of the content of the magazine, and then it was problematic in terms of printing a piece which most people felt would have been better placed in a women's magazine, in a feminist magazine, in a.
This is other women felt this?
I think in general that there was some opinion about that because there was some confusion, which I think that we've talked about before in terms of when Centerfold Fuse began to make the change into trying to deal with some kind of social issues. There was confusion amongst people who were reading the magazine strictly for its art content, people outside who were seeing the magazine and couldn't quite place the context of what these articles were doing. So I'm just saying it wasn't massively controversial, but it gave people pause to think in terms of what that a piece of sort of analysis of a social issue was doing. I think we were called after that. We were listed off as, I was referred to as a social worker, and I can't remember what the other people were. That was
in the magazine itself? Or?
No, this is in a critical review of that particular issue.
Right. How did that shift evolve internally, in a sense? What were the kinds of issues that were discussed internally within the magazine or editorially within the magazine?
In some ways, it was quite directed. I mean, we chose to go in this direction, but in other ways it was very intuitive. It was what we had access to, what kind of information we had access to. So, for instance, this was my interest. It was a piece that I wanted to do. The body politic trial coverage was available to us. It was things that came our way, and then, of course, the more of that we printed, the more it came our way. So it began to generate itself. In terms of direction, I think that what we saw ourselves doing consistently was responding to issues which we felt were misrepresented a lot of times by the media. That, I think, became, or were not investigated in any depth in the Canadian media especially. And that defined a lot of what the focus would be, so that there would be, so that women's issues, and then gradually evolved into some kind of feminist issues, became important in that way. And so, and we would, I mean, in some way more than any, I mean, because it's very vague and very general to say it was about, that we made a decision to talk about social issues, because that, in fact, when we decided to do the body politics stuff, it was because the information was available to us, and it was there were what we were reading as tremendous distortions or misrepresentations.
But in a certain sense, it was Okay, one thing about, in terms of the development of, these concerns with issues like the body politic and that, is they weren't isolated totally to the magazine, but the various people who were involved in the magazine were themselves, in terms of their own work, I think, evolving in similar ways.
Right. Well, I mean, for me, that was certainly true, and I think a number of people that we attracted to the magazine were either already, like yourselves, like other people that were already involved in trying to, very simple, it's very, very simplistic, actually, way of doing it, is saying that they were attempting to deal with content. Say, for instance, my work had attempted, Clive's work had made attempts to talk about things other than aesthetic things, or other than to clarify things rather than to obscure them, and some of that involved things which are called social issues that are of interest to the person producing them, and attempting to do independent productions of whatever kind of performance, of video, of audio, photographs that somehow represented something that was not represented in the main media.
I think it was also true that the issues, in a sense you described them as kind of free-floating, but the issues that the magazine became involved with were brought in by people's particular concerns, I think.
Well, yeah, they're contact points. It's a very sort of, the network, I think, of people who have come into the magazine are very personally, in a lot of ways, connected to each other through other groups, through other interests, through other kinds of things which they're involved in. So, for instance, that someone has a direct contact with a group who is working with domestic workers to change the laws around immigration. So we might get a report from them, the English as a second language group, that you knew those people. A lot of the content came that way rather than as abstract things.
That's what I meant, like
some of it
going
came,
out and looking for a mission in that sense, yeah.
Yeah, there was no sort of, it never, a lot of times it wasn't manufactured in that way, or what's hot now, or something like that.
Right.
For instance, when we did the immigration issue, it was not necessarily because that was a hot topic right then, but because we were all in some way dealing with it. I, in my job, people in the Albert Johnson case had come up, so it was present, but it wasn't. It wasn't that it was the thing that absolutely had to be done right then. It also was connected in with some other work that a number of us were doing, and interests that we had, and so some of the discussions.
I think it's got to do with like coffee. What's up, Kai?
Did we end the sequence?
Okay, go.
One of the things that's been seen as a weakness in the magazine is that kind of, or what one might sense as a kind of lack of direction, in a way, meaning that the issues sort of generating from people's particular concerns, either revolving around their work or a job or something, also lends to a kind of lack of cohesion in the sense of the content, as different people come in and out of the magazines with different kind of concerns. Have you perceived that, or?
Probably not as much as people on the outside who view it as a package which appears every 2 months, which is very difficult to decipher, I would imagine. Sometimes in terms of what the direction is, how did they make these choices? I'm sure people say, why is this in here? And often it's a very simple answer, but that it came into us, something appeared, or someone expressed some interest. I think that I felt at the time, when there was a lot of criticism in terms of, where is this going and what is happening with it, and we have to focus in on particular issues, that I felt that the magazine itself and its readership, which frequently becomes its writers, in a real way, would determine what was the direction of the magazine in some way. So I think that it, while there was a lot of direction by either Clive or myself or both of us, or in combination with or in opposition with the editorial board, depending upon how we were all getting along, that the actual direction was much less controlled than that it had to do with what was seen to be important. So, for instance, there was very little content say 2 years ago, about artist activities that were of a political nature, or attempting to do work that interwove with communities in some way. We didn't publish anything on that because we weren't really getting it. And that, I think, has started within the last year. I mean, pieces from Australia, from various groups working, PAD, political art documentation in New York and then in LA, and various groups of artists themselves, or cultural producers, who define themselves in terms of their work and the relation of that work to a larger group, whatever that is. If it's another, subgroup, or if it's the society as a whole, if they're doing very public work. Now that, we couldn't manufacture that because, in some senses, a lot of it wasn't there. And that, I think, is part of this is a very roundabout answer to that, but I think that has to do with the whole sort of direction of the magazine, that what appeared to be a rudderless ship was in fact something that in a sense was waiting for a certain kind of content too. That a lot of times we looked out and didn't see what it was that we needed to get in and to for instance, to write about our own issues as artists, as cultural producers within the culture. So that's been, I think, a good move, and I think that stuff would not have come into the magazine had not the magazine opened itself up in a way which addressed, sometimes in very specific ways, whether it was about Inuit television or light rail transit, women's issues that were addressed in a particular way. Gradually, as each of those issues defined itself individually, then connections, either through the editorials or through introductions that we would write, we began to sort of weave certain things together. And we began to weave those into issues which were being practiced by artists, artist groups, groups of independent producers, individuals. And then that work started to evidence itself in the magazine. And that, I think, that's what I would see as being, I think there was a period of time where it seemed up for grabs. I mean, anything could go in it, right? But
within certain limits.
Within certain limits, but I mean, you give the general mandate, and then, you just throw anything in you want, any minority group, any this, any that. It wasn't that loose and that open. There was some direction to it, but I'm just saying that it was also, in a way, a structure that was looking for input from other people doing work like we either were doing or wanted to do. I mean, it wasn't that we set up a model.
So how would you see the magazine now, in terms of, you say that's been an evolving process, where would you say it's now? Has it begun to define itself in a more concrete sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think part of that is simple longevity. I mean, I think if you keep going long enough, that more people see you, more people know about it. It's much less difficult to explain the magazine to people now. That's my barometer for readability, is that now you can actually, I have some confidence I can call up a total stranger. If they haven't seen the magazine, I can send them a copy of the magazine and they don't call me back and say, "What's this about?" So I feel that there is a certain amount of cohesion. I think part of that is editorially in how we and seek to either inform the people who are writing for us or actually assist them in terms of things that we put into the magazine, but assist them in placing their work that they want to put in there within a context. So we may group certain articles together, or we may provide additional information. So it's a bit more, things don't seem sort of one-off.
Mm-hmm. Okay, getting more maybe nitty about it. How would, say, editorial decisions be made? I mean, materials coming in.
Mm-hmm.
How do you decide? You know, we should print this. We shouldn't print that. This seems to touch on an issue or doesn't. How would you make those kind of decisions?
Some of them are quality decisions. They're whether or not the piece is. We get very, very few pieces which we feel are absolutely inappropriate. I mean, editorially, that we simply wouldn't print them.
Either because of content or quality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that then it comes down to a question of is it informative? Does it have a stance? I mean, in general, and that's what we do now. I feel like we do now when we talk to writers or people who potentially want to write something, or we're approaching to write something, that we can, I mean, if they read the magazine, they understand that there's no sort of journalistic construct around the magazine in a traditional sense, or not even traditional, just in a working sense, and that it advocates things very strongly, and it expects the people to take a stance on something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that frees up people who feel they couldn't either do the research or couldn't do the kind of writing that they read in major magazines. It frees them to feel that they can say what they want to. So it's a kind of a forum in that way, and I think we get people writing who perhaps wouldn't, or who would never think of writing in other publications. Right. It's not their trade. I mean, writing is a trade, and most of the people who write for us are not writers by trade.
What at this point now, what type of people would you say are writing? Because what I'm probably eventually aiming at is in a certain sense, most alternate or small magazines, particularly ones, say, from the left or progressive magazines, have a kind of definition. In other words, you can recognize, you can identify them as, holding a certain kind of position. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about Fuse almost in a sense as not defining itself specifically that way. So then getting back to what I was saying, like what kind of people are writing now, and in what sense, what shape is it taking on in a political sense?
Mm-hmm. I think that Fuse is still a non-aligned piece of media in terms of it doesn't have, so we can say within the women's issues that we cover, we have printed some things which are say criticisms of particular pieces of work by women, or the interviews that were done on feminist research. Every one of those every one of those products of either the research or the film, the tape, the whatever, has its advocates, its champions, and its detractors within the women's community. But I have yet to hear, and I've yet to hear it second or third hand either, that, for instance, Fuse shouldn't be written for because they did a review of this, or because they printed a piece by, or they printed an interview with this person who I don't agree with. So probably that we don't get that because we're not addressing one specific community, in this case the women's community, and where you get people who are allied with that, with, say, this doesn't happen with Fuse, I think people see it as, because we've attempted to define it as crossing these boundaries of groups and attempting to link them together and all that kind of stuff, that when say any community gets involved or identified with a publication or a piece of media, a radio show or a television show, or more likely a newsletter or magazine, that when that takes a stance that they don't like, for instance, a body politic has this as a difficulty, their readership goes bananas. They can't stand it. They really take it when they come out in any kind of oppositional sense to their readership. As of the only place where we have received that kind of criticism is say, specifically from within the arts community, over being critical in particular senses when, angels should have feared to tread there. Obviously, it was, seen to not be constructive. Other than that, the kinds of I think this is a long answer to what you were saying, but that it's not factionalized in that way, probably because people don't identify it as their magazine, which is a problem in some sense, but not in another. It has a more neutral neutral's the wrong word, but it's more neutral, say, to the women's community than, say, Broadside is, which is...
Or it's more broad-based rather than neutral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's less, people are less apt to get hot under the collar about disagreeing with something there than they would in a newspaper that they see as being their own.
Okay, to move it in another direction, because we've been mostly talking about the kind of social aspects in terms of the content and that sort of thing. I mean, there is a particular community, and you sort of brought that up in terms of saying where Fuse has gotten some flack is within the arts community. How do you see the magazine addressing that community at this point, and in what way does it address that community?
I would say that often we address that community as by seeming to write a prescription, which is a totally different approach than arts magazines in general, where you either have a critical review or you have a structural analysis, or you have a very positive review, or you have a profile, or you have a historical look, or there are formats within which most arts publications operate, or you have trend spotting, or you have some it's like sort of all there. Our tendency seems to be more as I say, prescriptive. I mean, we're always telling people what to do, what they should do.
Which is what?
In some sense, that we advocate things like, direct involvement in their own structures and stuff like that. And it's...
in their own institutional
in their
structure.
own institutional structures, in their own... when we, for instance, if our reviews of most stuff in many, many ways is critical to some degree, maybe not overwhelmingly so in all cases, but that's our reputation, because we feel it's I think individual writers and people within the magazine, in addition to Clive and myself, feel that it's a way of allowing people to begin to express something that is beyond the individual work, that how that work fits into some other kind of context, that it's not without meaning that it is shown somewhere, or the content itself is not without meaning. Or the imagery, or the way it's produced, or what the way in which government institutions deal with the smaller, artist-run structures. These things are not without meaning, and they're not sort of just simple, pragmatic, day-to-day decisions which can go on ad infinitum. They don't. And in general, what many communities, the artist community isn't alone, is that the practicalities of things take over until things become bad, and then sort of rampant paranoia sets in, and everyone is afraid that something is going to happen. But because there's been so little definition to lead up to that, whether it's cutback of funds or censorship or anything like that, that no one knows where to proceed from there. So there can be no clear definition of issues, and it's a real sense of just sort of going in with a shovel and just digging around. A lot of times you just are digging around, and the way in which work is produced, the reason, what it is reflecting back to the people who produce it.
Mm-hmm. So do you think it's the magazine's having an effect that way? Sorry, what? Oh, is that it? We finished?
That's it.
My knees.
We didn't talk about women's issues.
Yeah,
Did we?
you brought it up a lot.
It's hard not to.